So we are back for another episode of NeuroThursday. This is episode 16. And what we want to talk about again today is the central autonomic nervous system. So I want to emphasize this so much because this is basically something nobody really talks about. A lot of people talk about the peripheral autonomic nervous system, or where they say, well, where's the autonomic nervous system? Well, it's down here somewhere with all the organs, all the glands, etc. But there is a autonomic nervous system inside the nervous system or around the nervous system that is supplying the nervous system with what it needs. So we've been talking about this. We've been showing some stuff like how to integrate or how to functionally treat the cranial system, the shell of the brain. And what we want to emphasize today is the activation system. So we have this term, the ascending reticular activation systems, but that's not what we're going to talk about, only because ascending, first of all, they're not all just ascending, they're also descending systems. Second, they're not just reticular systems, so there's a whole bunch of other systems inside the brain that are helping the brain to survive in the end. So if we want to work with people and we think they have a neurological issue, and in my point of view, because I work with patients on an everyday basis since almost 18 years now, not almost 20 years, 18 years. And I've been working with functional neurology also for those 18 years. And I would want to say, how can you work without functional neurology? How is that possible? Somebody comes in and he has a knee pain. Well, there's maybe a problem inside the knee, maybe a structural problem, but it could very well be. And a lot of times it is that they have a functional problem. And of course, where does function come from? From the nervous system and applied onto some mechanics, but it's not the mechanics in the first place, unless of course you have a trauma or something like that. So one part of this approach is looking at the brain function. And of course you can have like proprioceptive or motor brain function, but what we want to look at is the autonomic brain function. So if you have a system in the brain like the motor cortex or the sensory cortex or whatever, which part of the brain is not working properly, correctly, then we want to check first, is there an autonomic issue inside the head or inside the brain that's causing the problem in the periphery? So that's our approach. That's how we want to go at it. And I've talked about this the past two episodes. I'm talking about this again because this is so important in our approach. So if somebody comes in with a knee problem or a hip problem or a back problem or an abdominal problem, whatever their problem is, the first thing we want to see is which part of the central nervous system correlates with this part of the body that's not working properly. And then we don't want to look at this connection like saying, oh, it's the vagal nerve and we need to like activate the vagal nerve. We want to see, where does the vagal nerve come from? Oh, it's coming from the medulla. What's going on with the medulla? Maybe the medulla is not feeling great. And that's why there's a whole bunch of issues going on. And maybe also some other issues that might not correlate in the first instance might correlate because they both come from the medulla as a brainstem system regulating a whole bunch of functions in the body. So we want to talk about, well, maybe there's something wrong with the medulla. And the first thing that could be wrong is not the way it calculates movement or the way it calculates homeostasis. Maybe it's the way it's being supplied, because you have these fantastic, most of the people in this world have these fantastic little gadgets in their pocket called smartphones. This is a small computer and it's got huge capacities of calculating things, algorithms, using visual data, audio data, etc. And nothing of this super function of video, photo, audio, calculator function works without energy. So if you're out of energy, if your battery goes flat, well, nothing is going to happen. You can't shoot photos, you can't make videos, you can't do nothing at all. So, and that happens with all computers. I mean, and our brain, in a way, also is a computer. I know this kind of similarity is not really right, but in a way it is, because one of the main things the brain needs to work properly is energy. So this energy needs to be supplied. And what we're going to look at again today is take a quick overview of the way we approach brain dysfunction from an autonomic standpoint. And what we want to emphasize today is we want to emphasize the activation systems. So the activation systems in terms of which part of the brain is activated by what, and we want to go beyond serotonin and dopamine. We want to look at the other systems that are also there and just kind of like put them in the place where they belong. So I have the spot here, so I know where I have to draw. And I'm going to draw a fairly big brain. So we're going to get a big brain here, and with the brain stem and the medulla and the cerebellum, and of course the spinal cord going down to the body. So this is what we're going to be working with. And we always say, or when we do seminars, we always say there's at least 4 aspects of the head or of the central nervous system you need to look at. You need to look at the outside. You need to look at the shell, because, like, for example, the shell of the brain is innervated by the same nerve, by the trigeminal nerve, that also innervates blood vessels, the extrinsic blood vessels that are lying on top of the cortex. So if you have a problem with your shell, if you have a problem with your cranial system, you might have a problem, or you would have a problem with your trigeminal nerve, and then you might also have a problem, that's what we usually see, with those brain areas that are affected by trigeminal dysfunction in terms of blood vessel dysfunction. So we know by now that already minor head traumas already cause long-lasting effects on blood vascular system or blood perfusion. So this is the first thing we look at, is the shell. So the cranial system is the system around the brain, protecting the brain, and also where it originates also gives you a hint that it's also part of the nervous system, because it originates embryologically from nervous tissue, the neurocranium, at least not the visceral cranium, but the neurocranium does. So this is the first thing. So we always say the house of the brain, and of course we have a house which is not, which is also bony in terms of the spine, but it's also got this part which is the dura, which we consider the house or the housing or the protection for the part that's going downward. And of course, you have this dural covering also all over inside the head. So the nervous system, or the nerve innervating this part, the meninges and the cranial system, the sutures, that's the trigeminal nerve. So if you have a trigeminal nerve dysfunction, this will also affect blood vessels, and that's the next thing we want to look at, or what we look at when we look at a patient, is how is the blood vessel function of the head. So blood vessel function, we usually take red for that, of course. And here I just want to draw this very easy to see, very simple. So we have one part of the blood vessel system that's going to the outside of the brain, which is the extrinsic system, and one part of the blood vessel system that's going to the inside of the brain, which is the intrinsic system. So, and the innervation of the skull and the meninges and the extrinsic system is the same. It's the trigeminal nerve, not completely. It's not only trigeminal nerve. There's a very heterogenic innervation. So there's also other parts of the nervous system, facial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, trigeminal nerve, upper cervical ganglion, and those are the main innervation systems for the extrinsic vascular system. So you have a great overlap of what's going on in your face and what's going on in the bottom of the skull and what's going on around your skull. Also on the outside, also we know that this part, the trigeminal nerve, you can stimulate this with an electrode and you will have a change of blood flow inside the brain. So this is already, I don't know if it's already used, but this is an experimental use for reperfusion, for example, after head injury or after trauma or whatever you have suffered. So this is what we look at, the outsider part, and of course the vascular part. This is what's going to the brain. And of course, then the next thing we look at is what's going away from the brain, which is also vascular, but it's also, of course, lymphatics. So you have the lymphatic system, which takes stuff away from the brain. So we always want to look at that also, the stuff that's going away from the brain. We want to look at the stuff that's going towards the brain, and we want to look at what's around the brain. So the housing of the brain. So these are three essential parts to take care of the function of the brain. So any of these are not working correctly, and we're not talking about severe dysfunction. So we're not talking about some kind of vascular problem that's causing nerve degeneration in the short term. We're talking about minor issues, which might only cause minor dysfunction of the nervous system, which might then not be a problem where people are having a stroke, but they might just have knee pain. So they're saying, well, when I go running, my knee is hurting. And we're saying, well, maybe it's your motor cortex, but then we want to ask, well, what's wrong with your motor cortex? Why is it not working properly? Does it have a problem from the outside? Does it have a problem in its cranium, in the cranial system? Meaning, does it have a problem in the trigeminal nerve? Does it have a problem in the vascular system? Does it have a problem in the lymphatic system? So we have facial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, upper cervical ganglion, so sympathetic nervous system. So these are the basic things that are happening outside here, influencing function of the brain tissue itself. So that's more on the outside. So this has also influence on other parts of the brain that are more on the inside, and also on the brain stem, etc. But what about like this part right here, where you have what is innervating the blood vessels going inside the brain, giving blood flow to basal ganglia or whatever structure they're supplying. So this is where the activation systems come in. So what the basic systems, which we usually talk about when we talk about neurology, we talk about the motor system and the sensory system. So we look at the corticospinal tracts or vestibulospinal tracts or tectospinal tracts, or we look at spinal reticular tracts or spinal cerebellar tracts, all these tracts. So those are tracts that are carrying information that we need for movement or for body function. But what we need to realize that besides all these tracts that are already going up and down the spinal cord and going into different parts of the brain, we have a part of the nervous system, which I call the nervous system inside the nervous system, or the nervous system of the nervous system. And that's the part that's taking care of the brain so it can calculate them. That's like the complex part. It's not like you plug in your computer into the socket and there you have some electricity coming through. This is a little more complicated. So the supplying the brain with everything it needs and taking away the stuff it doesn't need, that's a very important part of brain function. So activation systems are not only there to activate the brain, they're also there to regulate the blood flow inside the brain, which totally makes sense, because if they activate, for example, with noradrenaline. So noradrenaline system is sitting in the pons. It's locus coeruleus, which I pronounce in a German way, but it's Latin actually. Locus coeruleus is the noradrenaline system of the brain, of the central nervous system, going up and going down. This is sitting in the pons. So here I'm going to take a different color to put some of this in here. So maybe this is the pons right here. So up here is the mesencephalon. So this is the pons. So you have something going down and you have something going up into the brain, acting as an activation system. So, and if you activate the brain, if you want to activate the system, and we're going to talk about what activation actually means, you might also want to supply the brain with more nutrients, because activation usually means more use of nutrients. So it's very wise of the system to say, well, when it's going up, when the activation is going up, at the same time, I'm going to make sure that this system is supplied with more energy or more oxygen or glucose or whatever the brain is needing at that point of time. So what can we compare activation systems with? So what I usually use as a comparison is you have a radio, so you tune it to a certain frequency, and the certain frequency might give you some news. So that's the content. So you're hearing the news about what's going on in the world. So that's the content part of it. And the other part of your radio system is how loud do you put it? So how loud is the information you hear? And that is basically what activation systems do. They regulate the loudness of the signal. So this is very important, because you know very well that if you have a radio and maybe you're a little further away and it's very low, the noise is very low, you're not going to hear the content. You're not going to be able to say what is the person saying about what's happening in the world. And if you turn it up too loud, maybe it's just irritating, or maybe it's distorted signal, and then you can also not understand what it is. So this loudness has to be regulated all the time. And so if I touch my arm like this is sending a signal to my sensory system. So left arm, right sensory cortex, very simple, going through the thalamus. So, but the way the brain is interpreting that system depends on the loudness. So if I don't change the way with the force I stroke, this signal can be changed by my activation system, because they can say, well, I want to know more about this, so I have to activate the sensory income, I have to activate my spinal cord, I have to activate my sensory system. So this is activating the spinal cord, so I get more information, like I'm activating my brain, so there's more capacity or more activity in the brain to take care of this information, to use that information to calculate some response. So this is very important. You know, this is happening like with your eyes when you go in the dark, and then your eyes adapt to the dark, and then you go into the light. At first, it's kind of irritating, and then your eyes adapt to the light. That's what's happening all the time, and that's what activation systems do. They adapt the system all the time to what is needed. So I don't want to have a very clear information about my arm all the time, because I don't want to be aware of my watch on my arm the whole day. I just want to be aware of it when I need it, but I don't want to be aware of it all the time, meaning that I would be sitting there like, oh, I got a watch on. Oh, I got a watch on. Oh, still got a watch on. So this needs to be regulated. That's what activation systems do. And at the same time, they regulate the blood flow inside the brain. So let's just go through a few of these. So this is, I said, noradrenaline system going up and down. This is, of course, one of the systems that's usually in all the textbooks of the activation systems, or of the ascending activation systems, but it's also descending. So it's also going to the spinal cord. You also have some parts in the medulla down here, which are serotonin systems. So the serotonin system, also well known from the textbooks, the noradrenaline, the serotonin system, these are the rapid nuclei, which are distributed through the brain, and the bottom part, the medulla part, is going down into the spinal cord. And also there's some rapid nuclei up here in the pons and in the mesencephalon, and they're actually also going up. So serotonin, very important for regulating the sensitivity of the motor system and of the sensory system. So if you go further up, of course, we have another one which we know very well, which is acetylcholine, which is sitting right in here in the mesencephalon, also going up and also going down. So this is one system also that's going up and down into the spinal cord, acetylcholine. And dopamine is also going up and down to regulate the function in the spinal cord and inside the brain. So these are systems that we know: serotonin, acetylcholine, dopamine, and noradrenaline. So, but beyond that, there's quite a few other systems. And of course, because these systems are sitting here in the reticular formation, that's why the original term is ascending reticular activating system, but it's also descending, and it's not only sitting here. So where else do we have systems? And I want to draw a big circle right here about this area where the hypothalamus is sitting. The hypothalamus has different systems, not only neurotransmitters, but also hormones that regulate brain function. For example, oxytocin and vasopressin. Those are two hormones that are not only regulating blood flow and things like that in the periphery, they're also doing that in the brain. And one of the aspects that are defining activation systems that are not only releasing something into the brain, like so by perfusion, it just kind of goes through the brain. They have neurons going into other parts of the brain, and so they can just set off the vasopressin or oxytocin where it's needed. And you have, not in all parts of the brain, but a lot of parts of the brain, you have receptors for vasopressin and oxytocin. So that is the way, and that is usually called the social circuitry. So because that's regulating social behavior, the way you react to other people. And this is also parts of the system that are going down. What else do you have here in the hypothalamus? You have histamine. So histamine is also a neurotransmitter that is doing a lot of things. And we know that like from antihistamine drugs, which used to cause, like when they first were made, which used to cause epilepsy. So they were very, they caused a great disbalance, the antihistamine drugs in the brain causing epilepsy. So we know that histamine is somewhat necessary for electric balance, electric stability in the brain. So histamine is coming from the hypothalamus area. Orexin or hypocretin, I don't know if I said that right, is also one neurotransmitter, or I think it's actually a hormone that is causing sleep-wake differences. So orexin is causing you to wake up. If your orexin receptors are not working, like in narcolepsy, you fall asleep all of a sudden. So that's also one of the systems that's causing an activation. They're very basic activation. So you see how important this part of the brain is for your sleep-wake cycle, or am I awake during the day, or am I just kind of like sleepy, or do I actually fall asleep because I have narcolepsy? So this part of the brain, very important for regulating function inside the brain, regulating activity inside the brain, and also regulating activity going down. Another part that's very important is the prefrontal cortex, which is also going up and also going down into the spinal cord. Glutamine is the neurotransmitter this part of the brain is using, and prefrontal we usually associate with thinking, with cognition, with these things. We're saying, well, that's our center where I can plan, I don't know what I want to do, my goals and stuff like that. But this is also a neurotransmitter system activating other parts of the brain. For example, if I tell a person to watch out for red items sitting in the room, this part of the brain is going to activate part of the visual system, especially the parts that are responsible for seeing red. So this is what is happening. It's activating the neurons, and those neurons are then more active, even if I haven't seen anything that's red in my room, but I'm looking out for something that's red. And by activating them, I'm more receptive for red things in my periphery. So this is how you can consciously activate parts of the brain to be responsive to certain things, to certain stimuli, to certain colors, to certain sounds. And this is what also this activation system is doing. Glutamine or glutamate, kind of interesting neurotransmitter, because it also causes neurodegeneration if it's not degraded properly. So if you have an overexcited brain, maybe through too much stimulation, you get neurodegeneration, because this neurotransmitter causes cell death of neurons if there is too much. If you have a problem of degradation, like if your enzymes are not working, they're degraded, and there's issues like clinical issues where you have like antibodies to that enzyme, and that is causing too much glutamate to be inside your nervous system. And if it's more in the periphery, you have something that's called like a stiff person syndrome. So you can't move properly because there's too much excitatory neurotransmitter in your nervous system. That is a severe problem, causing not only movement disability, but also pain, because the muscle is always tightened up. And this is caused through a lack of enzyme or antibodies to the enzyme degrading or causing a degradation of glutamate. So this is a neurotransmitter that you want to have, because you want to get, you want to have enough attention, or you want to pay attention to stuff. You need that neurotransmitter, but you don't want to have too much of it. So another part of the brain, so these are the parts of the brain that also activate top parts of the brain, or the brain functions up here, and also spinal cord function. There's some additional systems that are mainly only active in the brain, as far as I know right now from my research, which is thalamus. So thalamus we know as like the sensory relay, or the relay in the brain, but that's also a glutamate system. So this system also secretes glutamate to like regulate other parts of the brain again. Then you have the basal ganglia, and of course this is very wrong what I'm drawing right now. The basal ganglia, not at this. This is just a kind of an illustration of what it is. So basal ganglia are GABA systems, so gamma aminobutyric acid, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So you need excitatory neurotransmitters, you need inhibitory neurotransmitters to get the balance. So too much of that, you can't sleep. Too little of this, you can't sleep. So valerian root, for example, is a plant extract that causes the brain to produce more gamma aminobutyric acid, get more inhibition in your activity, you get better sleep. That's why this is working to cause sleep. So another GABA system is the cerebellum. And here I assume that there's also descending parts, but I don't know because I haven't found any literature on that. But we know that it is inhibitory to other parts of the brain, brain stem, etc. So you have excitatory systems, you have inhibitory systems, and here of course also Noradrenaline would be more an activating system, an exciting system. Serotonin is more turning you down, tuning you down. It's more getting you to relax, etc. It's not something that makes you happy. That's not true. That's not what serotonin does. Feeling happy, that's endorphins or things like that, but that has not really a lot to do with serotonin. So also dopamine, maybe that I would like to just mention that dopamine is not a reward hormone or reward neurotransmitter. It's not like I achieved something and then I get a dopamine rush because I did so good. Dopamine is what keeps me going. It's actually what's making me seek things. Is it food or is it success or what it is? That keeps me going, keeps me moving. If there's a lack of dopamine, I'm not moving. That's Parkinsonism. So dopamine is active as long as I am looking for something. And when I am successful, if I found something, and I mean, animals just, you basically go looking for food, then dopamine stops. And as soon as I see food, I get more serotonin into my brain. And that's already saying, oh, I got this already. So that's part of that system. And once I ate it, I can have more serotonin in my system saying, well, now I can rest. Okay, because I don't need to rush off again to find the next food again, unless that really didn't make me happy. Then again, dopamine kicks in, gets me going again, turns on my seeking system in the brain. And here I go again, looking for food. So this is what we have, and this is basically it. What I wanted to talk about today is the activation system. So what does it look like when a patient comes into my practice or into the practice of people I teach? They have maybe they're not going to come in and say, well, can you please check my gamma aminobutyric acid system, because I think there's something wrong with it. Maybe they have read some literature and saying, well, maybe I can't sleep because of that. That could be right. They might be coming in because of some other issues. They might be coming in because they're having a problem with their leg or their knee or their hip. So if you have too much glutamine or glutamate in your system, you might get too much activation into your motor system. So that's not going to help when I want to walk. Maybe then my muscles are going to get stiff or they're going to get tight. That could be a problem in the central part. So maybe this person has had a head trauma, hitting his head right here, or maybe hitting his head in the back and then getting a whiplash of his brain. And then this part of the brain, maybe the vascular system is not working properly, or the neurons are not working properly. And then you have maybe a too much discharge of glutamate into your system. That's what we want to regulate. So we don't want to treat the knee. We want to treat the brain, and we don't want to treat the knee-brain axis in terms of sensory motor function. We want to treat the brain first. Say, well, we're going to help you regulate, because we want to help you regulate your vascular, your lymphatics, your cranial system, and also your activation system. So your brain tissue, your brain function can regulate properly, so you can have a perfect output and a perfect input, whatever perfect means, but an adequate output, an adequate input in terms of the situation. Not too much. I don't want to feel my knee, and every second I move, it's like, oh, I feel this, I feel that. And I don't want to have the muscle real tight when I'm just here, standing here, not doing any weightlifting or something like that. So this is important. This needs to be regulated. It's the loudness of the system. So, and that's what we do. That's our first line approach when somebody comes in. Of course, there's also something could be going on with the function of the sensory motor system in terms of information flow, coherence between the system, electric problems. So the system cannot activate the coherence between motor systems and muscle function. So cortical motor coherence problems, which is more like an electric phenomenon. So yes, that could also be it. That's what we look at in the second look. First, we look at the autonomics, then we look at sensory motor function, and then we go on from there. So this is what we do. This is neurofunctional integration. This is the Neurolog Academy. If you like this, you can maybe like it or share it. You can watch it in full. We've been recording this also on Zoom. You can look at it on Neurolog Academy TV, which is our YouTube channel. Yes, this is what we do. Functional neurology. I thank you so much for being here and watching. I'm just going to say hello to some people. And I will be back, I think about 3 weeks. I will announce, and this time we're not going to be going to the central nervous system. We'll be going to the peripheral nervous system in terms of, we're going to have a look at the function of the autonomics of the body. This is our next step and we have a lot of things to talk about. Yes, so I hope you have a nice evening. I want to say goodbye. I'm just going to go into the chat on Zoom. You could also join us if you want to at some point. Bye-bye. See you later.